Welcome to another live stream. The Gangstalking Masquerade. As a targeted individual, everything about the scenario that you were in involves a huge amount of deception. It involves, situational appropriation. It involves individuals who are gaslighting you. It involves street theater. It involves, people pretending that there's someone they're not. And not only that, just the fact that you have a split between the people who don't know about this stuff and the individuals that are in on it, you're basically caught in the middle of that whole thing. And I've talked about the isolation that targeted individuals deal with. And even if you're one of those people who are still interacting, you might have friends or whatever, or maybe you're not getting stalked by your family members. A lot of times they're involved in the harassment. You still have that weird isolation because you can't really say anything. Typically, you can't just tell people that you're being stalked and harassed in a way that targeted individuals who are experiencing higher forms of harassment. Explaining that type of situation is really not, that's not something I would suggest that anyone tries. But, if you do, that's going to be a huge problem. Okay. Anyone would know that. And there's a lot of targeted individuals out there who have done that. And I've mentioned before that you just assume that, at the beginning of this whole thing, at least that's usually what happens. They like to discredit people within the first 2 to 5 years. These things are happening to you, depending on the clever infiltrators that could be around you, maybe even in your own family. You start talking about this stuff, and rather than to get help, rather than people to understand you, rather than for you to get sympathy, rather than you getting support or anybody believing you, even if you're a credible individual, you're immediately discredited. You are immediately taken into that realm to where you have that logistical conundrum, and I've talked about that before. This stuff is immaculately hidden. The individuals involved in it, they can be infiltrated in a way where they have literally demonic influences in their life. The technology that is used against targeted individuals is out of this world. It is something that has been hidden away, along with the things that I've talked about before involving the secret societies and the infrastructure of this world, where targeted individuals don't really understand what they're dealing with. They try to compartmentalize this whole thing, but really it's a multi-tiered, multi-orbed mechanism. Okay. And the individuals who have technology, they also have other things going on. And it goes back into that hidden knowledge and secret wisdom. And I talked about the fact that when you amalgamate the spiritual dimension in with this, you have to do that with the technology because they're the ones that came up with it. I've talked about that before. A lot of people are really confused. And when I talk about, the demonic, or I talk about the spiritual connection in gang stalking, it immediately takes them into an area where they're seeing people messing around with spells or incantations or blood sacrifices or something, or, horned shadowy beings who are, doing all these things. But it's not like that. And when you look at the Genesis 6 account, you see some of that stuff happening, actually. I mean, I'm not throwing out, the incantations and the black magic, the witchcraft, and all those things that are involved in that stuff. You even see that in the secret societies. You have a melding of these things in there. But primarily, what you're dealing with is a dispensation of knowledge, wisdom, and technology to mankind, and that creates the hierarchy. Okay, so one of the things that targets will notice right away when they're dealing with this whole thing is that everybody seems to be in on it at least the people that are attacking them. And then the confusing aspect is you have people who don't know about it, and then you have the people who are pretending. And like I said, for a target to reasonably assume that if they're being attacked and harassed so they can get help or whatever, that somebody's going to listen to them, but it doesn't work that way. And then it's, whoa, what do you mean people are after you? And that doesn't make any sense. And why would the government spend money on you or whatever? And it always goes into the same level. And at the end of the day, you have a logistical conundrum that the targeted individual has to figure out how all these people are being coordinated at them, how they are dealing with this demonic hive, depending on how that works, or the collective or the collusion of individuals, and the unlimited resources that seem to be employed, not excluding the bewitchment of the target in the sense that they're experiencing the sequelae of sensitization and some of the scientific aspects of gang stalking that have infiltrated the mind of the individual. Things that you deal with, years or decades after, if you survive that long, and you catch yourself doing, and we've talked about that before. We've talked about people reading into things, and how you have to forgive yourself, and the fact that you've been subjected to stimuli that is different than the other individuals around you is a big, I don't know, it's a big aspect of coping with this and realizing what's going on, because as you look around at the lateral comparisons in the landscape that you are moving through, most of the people that you're going to deal with, they have no idea that this can even happen to someone, let alone that you are dealing with it. And getting back to the theme of this whole thing, you masquerade as if nothing is wrong, because you have to. There is no choice. Okay, if you could try to talk about it, you're just going to get discredited. You're going to end up looking crazy. That's surrounded by plausible deniability. That's the way this stuff works. That's the way it's designed. And then you get your leg caught in that whole thing, and you get sucked in. But the people that you were dealing with, they're also masquerading. They are acting as if they don't know. They don't know about this whole thing. Really? Oh my goodness! Well, I've never heard of anything like that before. And they'll be sarcastic, or they'll just pretend like they couldn't even imagine, the thought would have never come into their mind or whatever. And you are forced into that place of silence. And I've been living there for a long time, with the exception of the channel, because before that, I didn't talk about it at all. I mean, there were a couple of incidences, a handful, I guess, where I met people that I talked to them about. I talked about that guy that I met in the hospital, and he was classic, man. They shot him up with Invega, shot him up with antipsychotics. He's laying in his bed for 3 days. The first thing out of his mouth was, "I'm not crazy." And then he starts talking to me, and he starts showing me evidence that he had all these papers from the bank. Somebody had gone and literally hacked his account, stole his money, chased him down to Mexico. It was straight off of the game. And I talked to him about it a little while, and I don't even know what happened to him. But for the most part, you don't. You can't talk about it, and you have to be real careful. As far as the targets and stuff like that before too. And I've mentioned that it's okay for you, as you're sharing information or trying to at least connect with somebody in this nightmare. If you're talking to other targets or whatever, maybe making a video or whatever, to change some of the details, the minute, insignificant details of a particular scenario, because you don't, the whole problem comes, it's like when targets walk around and they tell people that they're, being stalked and harassed. And then people that don't know about it and they hear about it, they're like, "Oh God, that person's crazy." And then let's go mess with them. Let's go do something. Let's show them, they're living in this fantasy, at least from their perspective. Let's really show them what it's like to have somebody do that. So, but they have no idea. And so then you get these false positives and people start harassing the target. And, but the whole point is that, if you talk about it, it's just, you get all these different things. And if you give out the information to just anyone, eventually whether it's the sensitization, whether you're reading into these things, whether it's the mind virus of gang stalking, whether it's a false positive, the sequelae of being subjected to constant harassment, or maybe even electronic harassment, is that you're gonna come to a conclusion that's false. You're gonna have that reaction. I've talked about some of the funny things that have happened to me. I think it was a squirrel up on my roof one morning, and I've had people throw things at the house or whatever, but the first thing about that, that's them. Somebody's throwing something. It's pretty loud too. And I went out there, and this squirrel was up there. And then I think the other example that I've given before, this lady was walking down the street. If I wouldn't have had a security camera, I never would have figured it out. Banging on everyone's window. She must have left the bar. It was left her 2 o'clock, 2 a.m. in the morning, and I'm in a dead sleep. And boom, boom! Somebody starts banging on my window, and just your heart just because all these things that happen to you as a target, you're threatened. People are saying they're going to kill you. They're believing all these weird things about you or whatever. You're dealing with a menagerie of individuals who become involved in this whole thing in different ways. Some of them, they can be paid or whatever. Some of the people are just indoctrinated, and they're looking for a way to vent. Other individuals are spiritually influenced, and the whole thing comes together. You just don't know what's going to happen. And I remember my heart was just pounding, and I thought, oh gosh, and I went, they must have gone right in front of the camera, And so I looked, and here's this lady walking all the way down the street, banging on everybody's windows. Who would have guessed? And it's not uncommon, at least for me, especially in the beginning, when some of the things would happen, I wouldn't even, because you realize you're kind of feeding into the whole thing when you jump up and look out the window or run outside with a bat or a gun or something like that. And you're just feeding into it, and they can also set you up. And so you get to the place where you realize not reacting is important. But if you don't have a security camera or something like that, then you'll come to a conclusion. You'll assume something. You might deal with food tampering or other things. And you just maybe have some indigestion or something else, and you assume the worst because it's just the way it is for targets. And I'm assuming you guys can hear me. Doesn't look like very many people are in here tonight, but I'm going to pull up and see who is here. Olga, welcome to the live stream. And we also have Water Otter, and they say it's human trafficking. Okay, well, sometimes they'll do, but technically it is one way or the other because people are being experimented on. They're guinea pigs. It's basically the same thing, unless that's exactly what you were referring to, because a lot of people worry about being abducted. In fact, some of the people speculate that targets, they just end up looking nuts. And, with all the rumors about them, being on meth or whatever, and then all of a sudden they just disappear, especially after they, discredit themselves around that plausible deniability and just look nuts. Who would ever look? I mean, they would assume that, they're somewhere. Maybe they, got lost in a psychosis. They're out there somewhere running around, maybe with amnesia, or they committed suicide or something like that. But, because I've heard that there was a guy that I used to talk to up in Washington who said that these white vans, seemingly, I mean, they're everywhere. It could have been sensitization. I'm just taking his word for it. We're following him around, and some of the suggestions that he was getting, and that's the problem. It's that some of it's just a fear campaign, and they push the target over the edge of that place of fight or flight, again, to keep you stressed out. So some of it is psychological, but you just don't know because they would do something like that. But he thought maybe they were going to chase him down and grab him, kidnap him or something. You just don't know. You don't know. And let's see what else is. Nicholas, welcome. Oh, don't worry about it, man. And Rise to Power, welcome to live stream. David Dodson, welcome to live stream. Okay. And Olga seems to be looking for different groups of individuals out there. Satanic Freemason, military government whistleblowers. There's there's people out there that are persecuted for whistleblowing, which is something that I always look for anytime somebody says they're blowing the whistle, like that alien thing we had, the disclosure and all that stuff. It's just really suspicious. Usually, there's persecution involved in that. Usually people aren't so complicit. I've ran into other individuals out there who say they're blowing the whistle, especially those guys who seem to know all that stuff about the covert technology involved in torturing targeted individuals. Very sophisticated stuff where nobody would ever know. They can do all kinds of things to you, and basically hiding in plain sight with extreme plausible deniability, and they just get away with it and make you look nuts. And for some reason, they're not experiencing any persecution. Very suspicious. So anytime somebody tells me they're a whistleblower, I always look for that. Even when I talk to targets, it's not that gang stalking can't manifest in different ways. It does. Not everybody's dealing with the same thing all the time. And sometimes it changes. It literally does. So it's not like you can figure it out. But you can tell, it's like some of the videos that are out there. I was talking to a target the other night, and you got somebody walking around just kind of pointing out things that, are just people living their lives. The creepy part about targets who get, video cameras or, some type of technology to try to get evidence of their gang stalking, it's like they know. I mean, I've experienced that. That's one of the first things that really freaked me out, because everything around this is like they know, whatever it is, whether it's the directed conversations, little street theater games or whatever. However all that stuff works, it always involves a type of knowledge of whatever you're dealing with, your ordeal, and the suggestion of you being surveilled and all that stuff. And when you move into that arena, it's I mean, what do you think about something like that? Everybody's attacking you. It's obvious. There's all kinds of stuff going on. People are doing stuff, breaking in your house, and as soon as you get a camera or a body cam or one of those pairs of sunglasses with a little camera, they just stop. All of them. How does that work? Make you think a little. Really? It's the suggestion that you're dealing with psychics, with people with telepathy and all that. That's always going to be part of the targeting. And of course, there's a lot of different hypothetical ways that could be happening. Some people go into the area of technology. Some people go into some type of special gift or something that people have. Others will take it into the realm of the spiritual, and I would imagine it's kind of amalgamated together. But the whole idea is that people seem to know, no matter what you do, it's like they're going to know. That's one of the things that a lot of targets will talk about is retaliation. And one of the things that is natural when somebody's being attacked, when their life is threatened or whatever, or turned upside down, is like, maybe I might have to do some smacking back. Maybe shut them up, or maybe they'll get the hint, leave me alone or whatever. But the thing about it, and a lot of targets, of course, right away, that's probably the first thing that goes through their mind, but it's like they know. So whatever you do, if you're just going somewhere and you feel like people are following you and you're trying to be random, like some of those targets that talk about going on the run or whatever, it doesn't seem like it matters. It seems like they're up on it. They're way ahead of you, man. It's scary. And so the whole idea of retaliating, I mean, you got to think about that as a targeted individual. I've talked about that before. It's one thing to be a free moral agent of society and deal with persecution. And if you want to take a couple of them down or do something or confront someone or whatever, and then you're going to deal with that inevitability, or more than likely you're going to get in trouble or incarcerated or something. And then what? What are you getting out of that? You're not going to get anything out of that. And you can only assume with all the other things you're dealing with like that it would literally be like the worst thing you could do. It would be like the complete opposite of what you wanted. And I think that's probably one of the ways that a lot of the targets get taken down within the first 2 to 5 years. I've mentioned Myron May several times. We can't judge anybody. I don't even judge myself. The Bible talks about that, you got to be careful. But he would be a great example of what not to do in the face of heavy tyrannical gang stalking. Myron May was dealing with intense, higher forms of harassment. It's definitely understandable that he would, lose his mind. The guy was a lawyer, a prosecutor, as I understand, educated, pretty much a normal guy, and then everything just, like all targets who experience gang stalking, just lit off. And I don't think he made it that far. I think it was around 3 years or whatever. And someone said that he had mentioned that or asked the question, do you think maybe, if you do something, it'll stop? And in other words, the suggestion that came at him, from what I could gather, is that if he went out and killed somebody or did something, that they would leave him alone. And a lot of targets get pushed to that place, and whether it's the V2K or some demonic thing or an amalgamation of both those things, sometimes they'll do that because the target is so desperate at that point, that the attacks are so relentless, is that you get into solution mode, which is usually how those people get taken into that place where they make that mistake, is that you get into solution mode. And I've talked about that before. As a target, sometimes you just have to keep throwing time at this whole thing. Looking at a finish line that's like 2 weeks away or a month or something, that's kind of dangerous depending on what you're looking at, depending on how you're going to break this whole thing down. If you're a targeted individual experiencing higher forms of harassment, usually years, and I did that. Well, see, 2 years, it'll be over. 5 years, it's got to be done by then. 10 years from now, there's no way it's still, but you get out to those places, it's still happening to you. It's still, it's not stopping. That's one of the freakiest aspects of this whole thing, is you just never would expect that it could go to that level, man. You never would have guessed in a million years that this whole thing would be something you might even be dealing with for the rest of your life. I talked about that before. You don't know. You don't know what God's going to do. You don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully somebody's going to get caught out there. People talk about disclosure and everything, but getting back to, that whole thing with Myron, that's what they want. A lot of this is just for something like that, to where, who knows? Maybe the whole idea was to get rid of him within the first 2 to 5 years, like a lot of targets out there dealing with this intense harassment, and you get caught up in that whole thing. And once you get into solution mode, that's when you start making mistakes. You got to stop it. I can't take it. I can't take it for one more day. And, then it's pretty much game over at that point, because you can't control what other people are doing. You can't stop this beast that you're dealing with. You just have to, you have to deal with it incrementally. You have to deal with it through time and kind of turn the whole thing around. I've talked about that before. Using the Hawthorne effect is you can cancel some of this stuff out. In fact, I think Nick has talked about a lot of that stuff to where, he played quite a few games. And once he stopped, jumping from one foot to the next and playing their games, is they kind of lost the incentive. I mean, there's things you got to do to try to put up with whatever's happening to you. But, it's that reaction, that extreme emotional manipulation that they're looking for, the desperation of the targeted individual, right? It's like dealing with it's like dealing with a cat, right? They want, they like to chase. They like to toy around with you as a target. And that whole thing can get into that place. I'm going to go back into the comments, see who's out here. Okay. Firefighter, welcome to the live stream. Steve the Pigeon, welcome. It looks like Steve's got something. He always has some interesting stuff. Steve says, I moved from my last hellhole of an apartment, and at the new place, there's a DIY nut on the shared wall. Not sure if it's deliberate. Okay, so it looks like you're dealing with a lot of noise campaigns over there. That can happen. Apartments are really bad for that. I would suggest any targeted individual out there dealing with higher forms of harassment that you want to try and find a building that's standalone, a house, or sometimes they'll have multiple units on a property or something like that, but they'll be single units. They won't be, it won't be one big apartment. It's, I've done it all. And to be perfectly honest with you, the apartments were the worst. They were the worst. That's where you deal with most of the covert fuming, the poisoning and stuff like that, the noise campaigns, and even the directed energy weapons, because they can use that stuff. And you don't know. You have no idea. And they can put you in that place where they can subject you to constant harassment. You're basically surrounded on all sides. And it's beyond anything. So I know what you're talking about, Steve. I get it, man. And I've been there before. Hopefully things will work out for you there, though. We can put a prayer out there for Steve and all other targets who are dealing with this stuff, that their dwelling would be safe and sanctified, that they would have peace in their dwelling, and the people that were attacking them would experience negative effects and be brought to light and even prosecuted to the point where the victims would have monetary compensation if possible, within the laws of the land. In the name of the Lord Jesus. Okay. Okay, well, I'm just looking at the comments here, seeing what's going on here. And Nicholas Bosserman says, yeah, I don't buy or discount the Mason thing, but how do we know it's them? And if it's not there, that it's not all of them. Oh yeah, it's like a straw man argument. It's a red herring in the sense that there's people out there who experience gang stalking who have a heavy element of the Masonic in it. Okay, there's people who are maybe even in a higher area of Freemasonry that are involved in their gang stalking. I wouldn't doubt it. Okay, but then that's kind of the point that I was making at the beginning of the video, is that you have an infrastructure in society out there that is not designed specifically for gang stalking, but that's part of it. Okay, so it's similar to the whole idea of having a fraternity that is, everybody knows about the Masons, everybody knows about the Shriners, everybody knows about the other fraternities, but what they don't know is the levels of conformity and some of the things that are going on behind closed doors. So not all of those people are, even someone who could gang stalk you. But as I said, you have the spiritual handlers, then you move into even things that are genetic, even like the royals or whatever. I've talked about that before. And you get into the infrastructure of the deep state and all these things, even the Illuminati and all that stuff. It's all connected. It is. And so you have, the higher levels of, I don't know, the upper echelon of the secret world that is there. And then you have, people who are just amalgamated into that, whether it's just, for the sake of having that infrastructure spread out along with some plausible deniability, or you just have an intricate network built. It's the same thing. And so when people talk about the Masons or the Illuminati or even the deep state or whatever, yeah, there's people but they're not the ones in charge of it because it's bigger than that. Now, there could be specific scenarios out there where you have targets who are, like in a secret program, the government is basically at the head of what they're dealing with, whether it's the surveillance or the directed energy weapons or the street theater or, the neighborhood discrediting smear campaign or whatever. It could be that. And in that scenario, you're going to have different elements. I've talked to a guy that was getting harassed like that, and they chased him around, mostly around the East Coast. But, I mean, there was a lot of resources, but he wasn't dealing with like the demonic stuff. Some of it could have been, but it looked more like people were just kind of, I don't know, recruited to mess with him. Is what it looked like. It looked like it was more of some kind of a campaign that was launched against him rather than him, just being chased around by the demonic hive. But that can happen. It can meld together to the point where you don't know. But I think Nick has a valid point. It's like people who say that the government is after them. Okay, we'll flip it around a little bit. That might not be what's going on. You might be dealing with something that's purely more spiritual. The fusion centers, the deep state might not even know who the hell you are. Literally. And I've seen targets like that before, man. They assume that the vast number of people that are harassing them have to be getting paid a bunch of money, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. It's a reasonable assumption, but okay. All right. Okay. John the Baptist, welcome to the live stream. Jason Black, oh, welcome. Glad to have you. And Jason says his gang stalking is off the chain. And he says he's dealing with being poisoned and drugged. That's a popular theme in gang stalking, and it has a lot of reciprocity because everything you're dealing with in this little masqueraded, plausible deniability nightmare that all targets are in. It's you can't win for losing. If you say something, more than likely you're not going to be able to prove it because who knows what it is. It's probably not some chemical or something that you could just figure out easily. It could be a cocktail of chemicals with that type of synergistic gaslighting where targets are, subjected to different chemicals, then they have a volatile reaction and it just adds to the plausible deniability of it. And even if that's not what's going on, then you have to, worry about who's in on it. And it's like when targets go to the cops or whatever, and then they run into a perp or something, and they think the cops are stalking them, but they're pretty much everywhere. And so the whole idea of being poisoned and drugged and stuff like that, it's just, I mean, it takes your life into a vortex of, I don't know, anxiety, just to know that you're a person of interest, where people have kind of set their sights on you and are harassing you. Okay, or that you've been blackballed. Forget about the covert drugging and all that stuff with direct energy weapons or whatever. Forget about that for a minute. Just that by itself would be enough to freak you out. Okay, then you up the tyranny, right? People are breaking in. Right now, you're getting directed conversations that incrementally move into a more aggressive theme, which I've talked about before, that when you're dealing with gang stalking, you're dealing with themes. You start out with, little clues and hints and strange coincidences, moving up to more aggressive behavior involving personal information to the point of people doing things to you and threatening you. But once you get the break in, now that opens the door for other things, And it's like that incremental subjection that targets deal with, where they move into a place where they're getting boxed in. But then what? Well, all you have to do is suggest something, right? Well, somebody was, in my house. Who knows what they did? Did they do something? Did they get into the hygiene products? Did they get into, I've heard some wild stories. There was a gal out there. I heard her, like it was last week, talk about, just using, I think it was shampoo or something like that, where it just caused like burns and stuff like that all over her body. I've seen stuff like that. I have. Well, that's the next incremental step after the break-in. Because usually at first, if somebody just breaks into your house and it doesn't appear they did anything, as a human being who hasn't been, I don't know, subjected to the evil unveiling element that's out there, you don't think anybody's going to do that. They came in, but they don't want to do that. I haven't done anything to anybody. I'm a good person, or whatever. Because targets they're usually not doing anything wrong. And you wouldn't think at that point somebody's going to, do something. But then you start getting the direct conversations. We're going to give you cancer. We're going to drug you. We're going to poison you. We're going to have you in a mental institution. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. I'm not going to give any ideas in case there's a perp that's going to listen to this whole thing. But that's a popular theme. And then what? Well, now it takes the tyranny to the next level. It was bad enough for you to know that you're being harassed, bad enough that you are a person of interest, bad enough that you've been blackballed and are experiencing, the negative effects of that excommunication. But now people are breaking into your house. Now they're invading your space and more. Now you have to wonder what's wrong with the food and everything else. Or what are they doing to something? They put something in here. Matson Miles talks about that, where he deals with the fuming or other different devices, or a lot of targets will talk about that, where they can hear something coming from the vent. Did they put a speaker in there? Is it some kind of technology that just can do that, or is it demonic? What the hell's going on? And so you have different things going on. You're hearing things in your dwelling. You might be experiencing the sequelae of possible direct energy attacks, and now you're having issues maybe in another way. And of course they'll do that. That was the first thing that I dealt with, because the individuals, there was witchcraft and suggestions, and there was like an incremental setup. I've talked about that before. But when they really lit the whole thing off, it was all about sowing that seeds of paranoia, and the whole theme of poison and drugged, and they were going to give you cancer and all that other stuff. And then they had the aggressive incremental subjection to the point where, they're breaking into my house at night and drugging me and taking my clothes off. And then I'm throwing up. It was obvious that they're breaking into the house. And then I find out later they're using Epicac because somebody just literally came out and admitted because they got scared because, there's really no way they'd get out of the fact that I knew that they were part of it. Usually when these people do direct to conversations, that's, you don't know. I mean, you could assume that they know or whatever, but when you have somebody do the aggressive stuff that this guy did, I mean, he literally came up into my apartment and wanted to look at my fridge and start talking about all the things you could do to somebody with, poisons and their condiments and everything else. But so there was no way he got it, but he admitted it. He's like, "Oh, we're not trying to give you cancer. That was Epicac, And so they will do things like that, but they're not afraid to hurt you either. And I've had some real negative effects. So now you can't keep. Now you're afraid to keep food in the fridge. Now you're afraid, to leave your shampoo out or whatever. And it just takes you into that level of paranoia. And the social aspect of being a targeted individual is that, there's things you can't do. Now, it depends on what you're dealing with. But, you're still in that place where you are forced to, I don't know, masquerade at a higher level. Because you're always, you have to. You really don't have a choice. It's like I said, if you start talking about this, you want to be transparent, you're probably going to, you're going to be pissed off. You're probably going to be discredited. It'll just give them an opportunity to downplay what you're dealing with and minimize what's going on and call you out and use that whole thing to discredit you. So, it's just, so now not only do you got cameras, now not only are you, guarded and kind of looking over your shoulder, but you're afraid to keep food in your house. And you can even get to the place where they will attack your plumbing and stuff like that, depending on if they have access to the water feed. If you're in a house or something, unless they break into your water tank or something like that. In other words, it has to be the right scenario. I dealt with that out of the trailer. And I couldn't figure out how they were doing it, but they just turned the water riser off, disconnect the feed, put it in the pipe, and then reconnect it, turn it on, and then it just goes right up in your water heater. But really? If they're willing to do that, along with the other stuff and fuming, it just depends. So I know what Jason's talking about, man. And it's it follows those themes of gang stalking. And it looks like Jason might be dealing with some kind of a honeypot. Let's see here. I got to go back up in here. Read Ephesians 6:12. Oh, it's nice to see you. I wondered where you were. Haven't seen you in a while. Hopefully you're doing well. And Jason says, my ex-girlfriend's dad was up in the 33rd degree. Okay. All right. MCS1. Welcome to live stream. And they say most of the demonic stuff is coming from the Freemasons, I guess. Well, I don't know about all that. There's spiritual manipulation there. I would say that happens anyway. They're already after you, but at the same time, the witchcraft and the black magic and stuff like that, that's thick with that kind of thing. And a lot of targets, well, I dealt with that. A lot of targets will talk about that whole thing. You have an infiltration of that stuff within the secret societies, but there's a lot of demonic stuff going on. But I don't know. I wouldn't think that, because I believe that there are people who become involved in a target's life that are probably more demonically influenced than, a paid harasser or anything like that. And that can happen with with somebody in the Masons, obviously. But at the higher levels of, those people who are possessed and might even, be possessed by more than one spirit, is then you get to deal with those people in the witchcraft and stuff like that. Those people are frightening. And the scary part about some of them is you don't know until, it's too late. And it's like that stuff that Jason is talking about. And then you could be friends. You might even be going out with one of them. That happened to me. You're dating somebody who's involved in that. You don't even know. You catch them. Hoarding things that you assume are keepsakes. I mean, I ran into that a couple times with these type of individuals. Pieces of your hair, half-eaten Dorito chips, fingernails, clothing, things I'm not even going to mention. But it was obvious something was going on, and I'm not that special, really. You're going to have a half-eaten Dorito chip? What the? But come to find out, that individual was engaging in some of those things. But really, when you get into that whole witchcraft thing, a lot of it is just getting you to transgress and step out of the will of God in a way where they can attack you, because all those little incantations and spells and whatever. Unless they're gonna try and get you to ingest something, but really the big thing that they want is they want you to do something that you're not supposed to do. They want you have commit adultery or something. It's not uncommon for those type of people to go out and masquerade as a single person and use sex or perverted sexual acts or other things to get that individual in a place where they can be attacked. Hard drugs or something like that, or getting into, they want to read you your fortune or look at the tarot card thing or do a reading of some sort or whatever. And then once they get you into that place, then you can be manipulated. And that's really what opens. It's not so much all that other stuff that a lot of people would look at as ridiculous. It's really them infiltrating into your life, and that demon is, or whatever, the spirits are already part of their life. And then you have that connection. You have that point of connection. It's like the targeted individual dealing with direct conversations and street theater is you have to be within sight or in earshot. And once they got you within earshot or where you can see them, now they're in your head. It's inevitable. Don't think of the pink elephant. You're going to think of it. And the reason you're going to think of it because you're looking at it, you're thinking about it, somebody suggested it. And so that's how this stuff works, along with the environmental tyranny. And, it is all witchcraft, technically. A lot of people will take that out of context and say rebellion is witchcraft. That had to do with the comparison of the transgression of Saul, I do believe, in that example, to things that were already forbidden. So it's not necessarily that witchcraft is rebellion. That's not what it's saying. That's a reading comprehension issue. It's that it is as rebellion. So it's just as much of a transgression as that, in other words. And so, but witchcraft is completely different. They will infiltrate your life, and they have been infiltrated by spirits, and then they will do things, and then you get sucked into that vortex where now you're dealing with the demons, and you're also dealing with the individual, and that would be probably the most demonic aspect of gang stalking right there, when you get those individuals. And Jason said she was an Eastern Star. Yeah, well, that's double down there. Okay. And Firefighter says, I think I'm the first non-witch in my family for 5 generations. So you got a lot of people involved in that in your family. I've run into that kind of thing. Some of it's secret though, and that's really creepy when you start finding that stuff out. You know, when they start playing games with you, people start asking you to, I'm going to give you something to eat, or they want to give you jewelry or something, or they got a piece of clothing that they want you to wear or something, and then you end up getting sick as soon as you put the thing on, or things start happening to you. And I've seen that kind of thing. It's creepy, and then of course, they're not just going to do that. They have to act weird, keep it close to your skin and sleep with it or whatever. And they really rub it in. And a lot of that is just like, it's like a little game that is being played. Of course, the spiritual dimension is probably the ones attacking you, unless you're dealing with something technological, which it can be anyway. But you're gonna equate that whole thing together with them, and that's really when you get into the deception involved and individuals involved in witchcraft and the occultists. They think they have power. They don't really. They're basically bewitched by the whole thing, and the spiritual fingers are the handlers, the demonic entities that can really do that kind of thing. And human beings, they don't have that kind of power, but they're in communion with them, similar to the stuff that happens in astral projection or remote viewing. It's not really them. That's just it's almost like they're in communion with a being in the fourth dimension. At least that's the whole idea. Okay. I'm way back in the comments here. And it looks like John the Baptist is dealing with the death of his father, or the death of a family member. And that's pretty hard. So there was a relapse. I'm sorry to hear that. Well, forgive yourself. And sometimes that happens. We just put a prayer out there for John the Baptist that they would have peace and experience that comfort that surpasses all understanding. And we can rest in God's sovereignty, knowing that He's going to do the right thing in that. That's tough to deal with. Death came in through the sin in the garden. There was a rebellion before that, and there's a lot of speculative material out there in the non-canonical aspect of how all that worked. Pretty interesting. I put some of that in the playlist as the Book of Melchizedek. If you guys want to take a look at the rebellion and a little more in-depth look at Cain, Abel, and the stuff that happened in the Garden of Eden. But yeah, that can happen. That's a lot of people. I've heard a lot of alcoholics and other individuals that the death of a family member will take them and put them in that place where they kind of go back to maybe the booze or something else. And Nick says, not saying it's not them, referring to the Freemasons, just thinking they're trying to trick people into shooting up lodges. Yeah. I think that's if they can get you to do something nuts, that's kind of part and parcel as the whole thing, is that you have a targeted individual who is being harassed, obviously by a cabal of people, however their inclusion, you don't know. And then you're given the plausible answer as Freemasons. And you go off the handle, try and burn down a lodge or something like that guy up in Canada. Bad idea. Bad idea. It looks like Jason's dealt with some poisoning of the vehicle. Looks like maybe some surfaces or other things going on in there. They'll do that. Jesus Elohim, welcome to the live stream. Okay. Huh. Mind Games, welcome to the live stream. And Mind Game says no fear. Okay. Well, that's good. That's a huge theme of gang stalking because there are so many things that can happen to you. It's almost inevitable that fear is involved. You have fear campaigns, you have smear campaigns, you have the covert drugging, the covert poisoning, the vandalism, the character assassination. You deal with all that stuff, and it incrementally gets worse. Okay. MCS1 says they claim black magic stuff can work more if one is sinning. Would you say that's true? That would pervert the judgment of God, or I'm sorry, see me read that again. That would pervert the judgment of God, or this was already the judgment. Oh, that's speculative there. I wouldn't go that far as to draw God into something like that ever. Period. Um, but I've heard that, like I mentioned earlier, that's kind of what they do. Because if you're, walking with the Lord or whatever, and they try to put a hex on you, you might get attacked or something. A demon might be trying to do something, but yeah, usually the infiltrator will get you engaged in something and try to get you to sin or to do something. Yeah, that's what they do. And then, of course, that's because it just illustrates what's really going on. And they're not really doing anything anyway. It's the demons, or the spiritual entities involved around that individual. It's not them. So their little spell or whatever is kind of irrelevant anyway. But to look at the framework, yeah, that's how, but if you're not doing what if you're not doing anything wrong, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and everything, then yeah, that can just bounce off you. They won't be able to do anything. Sometimes this doesn't work that way though. Sometimes you just get attacked and tested or whatever. And Steve the Pigeon says honeypots will set you up with false allegations as well. Yeah, they'll set you up, man. It's it's classic for the targeted individual to just believe they can just live like a regular individual, and then they find out they're surrounded by these people, and they will accuse you. They'll make allegations. They will just flat out lie about you and set you up, and they might even covertly drug you or something like that. Yeah, they're evil. They don't play fair. Okay. Jeremy M, welcome to the live stream. And Jeremy says that he's just acting like a total zombie robot at work now. Absolutely no reaction. Yeah, the gray rock, they don't know what to do. No, that's what I do. That's exactly what I do. I've been doing it for a long time. It just depends on how much energy you have. Sometimes they'll zap the energy out of you, and then, how you doing? Oh, by golly, why don't you tell me what? And you're exhausted. You're just like whatever. They like that. That's kind of funny when they a target could be doing well and it'll like suck the life out of them. But then when you're doing bad, they really get a spring in their step, and yeah, it's like whatever. But they don't like that. They don't like the gray rock. That's a good strategy, Jeremy. Stalking bosses. Welcome to the live stream. Just reading your comment here. Gangstalking Clips. Welcome to the live stream. Okay. All right. I'm just reading through this stuff here. Okay. And Jeremy M says the best thing to do is just don't play the game. Yeah, that is true. I mean, it depends on what you're dealing with. But that's good advice, though. That's really the only thing you can do. That's what you have control over. You. You don't have control over them, and you're going to be dealing with the stuff that they're throwing at you. So it is what it is. But they want a reaction. They want you to become emotional. They want you to start playing their game, so to speak. And at first, I think all targets do. I mean, I did. You know, I tried to pretend like this or that, or I tried to play it up, and I didn't say anything, but I did give in to some of that. Even sticking up for yourself in a scenario can actually be playing into it, and they like that's bait. Sometimes they'll switch their harassment to where it's kind of a low level, and then you start expecting logic from the world again, thinking that your gang stalking is over or something. And, then they'll just come up and do something ridiculous, completely unfair against every law in the universe and the laws of the land, and just laugh at you. And you're like, I can't lose this time. You're going to get it. And you'd be wrong. You'd be wrong. I'm not saying you give up. I'm just saying that was bait. And if they got a couple other people in on it, well, now you're in trouble. And if you escalate that and get even more emotional, then you're really going to lose. I've speculated as to what they're getting out of it. I think some of these people are, getting some kind of a it's more than just a sadistic pleasure out of it. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's almost like they're vampires. Okay. All right. And it looks like Jeremy M gives another example. When perps try to talk to me, I pretend like I didn't hear them. Yeah. That's good. You just completely ignore them, basically. Well, you've been doing this for a long time, so they know what they're up against. And then they'll just give up, yeah. The other thing is when they, at first, a lot of targets will let people know, they'll play into the innuendos or whatever. And you don't want to do that. You want to play stupid. Even if it's an obvious innuendo. Play dumb. Sorry, guys. I'm a little tired. I had to do my brake pads today, and I am beat, man. I about tore my body up. It sucks to get old. It sucks to get old. And let's see here. We could do a little bit of a recap, I guess. The masquerading, gangstalking menagerie. And as I said, one of the best things to do, which basically what Jeremy has been talking about, is just pretend like nothing's happening. You're acting. Of course, they're going to play that game too. They're going to pretend like they don't know what's going on. And then, of course, if they get the targeted individual in a place they're trying to get help or confronting people or trying to, demand logic or accountability, they're just going to deny, deny, deny. So everybody is masquerading. Targeted individuals deal with that type of environmental tyranny. The trauma invasion technique that causes paranoia, moving into the sensitized landscape of the targeted individual, where it becomes more aggressive with break-ins and poisoning and drugging, like that stuff Jason Black was talking about, taking you into a place where you're incrementally being boxed in the sense that nothing is safe and you can't say anything. And if you do, either people will think you're crazy or they won't believe you. They won't listen. Sometimes it goes into the place where they'll start doing that stuff to the surfaces, like I think it was Jason said that, the steering wheel or something like that. They'll do that. They'll start, tampering with your food, doing all those things. You will deal with an infiltration into your life. And of course, they're masquerading as your friend or someone that you can trust, or maybe as, I don't know, a trustworthy coworker or something. But really, they're just getting close to you. And they will use that type of theatrical gaslighting. And then after the victim begins to experience the sequelae or gets called out or something or reacts in that type of emotional manipulation, that of course, they're going to be accused. And that just takes them into the next level of that gaslighting. As you're experiencing the effects of this masquerade of deception, manipulation, a death of 1,000 cuts. Some targets deal with noise campaigns. Sometimes they deal with being harassed in traffic. And it can take the target into a level where it doesn't seem like they can go anywhere without being harassed. And you just can't say anything about it. It's surrounded by plausible deniability. And at the end of the day, you're just paranoid. You're suffering from a persecutory delusion. They want to frustrate, intimidate, torture, provoke, sensitize, discredit, and gaslight. And these coincidences are something that can be explained by a type of collusion. A lot of the stuff that targets deal with, it can involve that sensitization. It can involve people being incrementally invaded through trauma and just start reading into things. But, there's only so many things that you could take to that level. It depends on what you're dealing with. And if you have to really read into something to find evidence for gang stalking, or if you're not sure, if you just think that you can't even count that. There are targets out there, like I said, who, they might even just be scapegoats and have been sensitized by material online. They think they're a target individual. They might not be. Either that or it's that situation where they stop doing it. Well, the target's trying to get evidence. That can happen too. But you should know the difference. And so you want to have very strict criteria. And like Jeremy was talking about, you don't want to react. And, the perps, they have little niches too. There's always those little coincidences around them. They always deny, they always reframe, they always play stupid, they always obfuscate. They always try to, take the environment around you, take it into a place of chaos. They like to promote that distorted reality. And if they get leverage on you, you're in trouble at that point. And they will try to provoke you, but they will try to minimize you. They will get in there and try to gaslight you. Some of them are polite and real sarcastic and nauseating. Some of them are sneaky. Some of them are obvious. And those guys are sometimes they're the most effective, I think, depending on what you're talking about. When you get infiltrated by a covert perp who wants to play the long con with you, and then they finally stab you, that really messes your world up, though, because now, nothing is safe. It's hard enough for targets to trust people, but if somebody's willing to go to those lengths to get to you, and I've seen that before, they will do that for years. It's creepy. So, and I'm not saying that they're working for the government. I don't, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it is that, but they do. They play that long con, and they get in there. If they get leverage over you, it's pretty much over. They love that, and they love to be flamboyant and fake, depending on the atmosphere. And if the target is discredited, they'll go to the levels of sarcasm that just make that look ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to go back in here and see what else is going on here. Okay, looks like Madsen Miles got something interesting here. Has anyone experienced seemingly in between our dimension and another unseen entities that make sounds moving around and rare occasions are seen by some means like a camera or a laser light? Well, that's a lot of the stuff that we talk about. The problem that you run into is usually when we start talking about that whole thing is we have the discrepancy of technology and demons, and we have that straw man argument. A lot of people that have spiritual attacks will talk about that kind of thing. They will hear things that sound like they're in the other room, but when they get there, there's nothing there. And it may be something that would really be impossible to fake. So I think at the Skinwalker Ranch, the example was the guy would hear things where it was like a glass vase or something would get knocked over and you could hear it break. And then you could hear all the little pieces, on the floor and everything. That's a pretty distinct sound. Okay. Unless you got a speaker or something like that and multiple, whatever. It's pretty hard to pull something like that off. And then, because the guy would go into the next room and there would be nothing there. Or it would sound like like something rolling across the floor. That's a very distinct sound. Plus, you could feel vibrations along with the activity. I've seen that myself. I had something happen a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, where it sounded like somebody was throwing a big bag of, like a 30-pound garbage sack of trash around my house, or full of something. That's what it sounded like. And you could feel it hit the walls, and it was loud, and it freaked out the cat. So I know I wasn't, hallucinating. But there was nothing in here. There was nothing outside. There was snow on the ground, and there was no tracks anywhere. It was just me. That was it. Me and the cat. How do you explain something like that? I don't know. A lot of people will go into the area of technology too, and there's, it's a lot of speculation in that, but there's that kind of stuff happens to targets, you just don't know. But a lot of people will deal with that kind of thing, which is interesting in Madsen Miles's case because, hypothetically, because obviously he said that he's found some things that were altered in his dwelling. So, I mean, that's pretty much proof that somebody's been in there and they've done something. Okay. There's no getting out of that. However, if you do not find those things And for some reason, you still have the classic, sequelae of that scenario, whether you're hearing things, you're feeling things, you're smelling things, or whatever. But there doesn't seem to be any real explanation for it. There's a lot of different possibilities, but you could also be dealing with something that's literally just spiritual. You don't know. That's the worst part about it. So it's, unless you amalgamate all that stuff together and just leave some leeway in that, it's real hard to I don't know, to go along, to get along on that one, because a lot of people argue about it. Jason, welcome to live stream. Looks like you're dealing with some harassment in traffic. And Mind Game says they will make you feel like you're living in a Matrix simulation. Yeah. Well, that's the thing about where we are. I don't think people really realize the creation that we're living in. On the subatomic level, you have neutrons, protons, electrons, you have quarks, you have all these things. And it's almost as if you were dealing with nanotechnology. But things can be arranged and they can be rearranged for the, and I'm only speculating because I could be wrong. But when you have something that goes down to the subatomic level where you really can't observe it because it's so small and microscopic, it's like that quantum stuff. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? It's both. Wait a minute. But the thing is you're not technically really observing that. You're observing the effects because it goes into the microscopic level to where you have that stuff going on the subatomic level. But, rearranging and arranging those things hypothetically would be possible, whether it's turning water into wine or, healing or resurrecting someone or whatever. God can do those things. I don't think anybody else can. We have some examples. I think there was a kind of a type of sorcerer, standoff with Moses and the guys representing Egypt. But so that it's possible that they could play that game. But to me, the point I'm making is that the created order that we live in is very complex. It's like a simulation, but it's real. It's not a simulation, but it feels like it. It's like the stuff that happens with the Mandela effect. People were set up, and then they start wondering if time travel is possible. And then these secret government factions have gone back in time and changed things. I know what was on the VHS tape that I had, and they remember the movie, and they remember the Luke, I'm Your Father, or Hello Clarice, or the bandana off the Karate Kid, or the braces on Jaws for Moonraker. They remember it, but it's gone now. It's like they're in a simulation. It's like they're in a place that is being manipulated, and it's hard to explain how all those things are working. And I think that's probably the best explanation that I can come up with. Really understanding where we are and the possibilities and impossibilities within the created order that we live in is important. So things can be changed, things can be altered, and delusions will be sent out. And you just have to know that you can't jump to any conclusions. The environmental tyranny mixed with philosophy, taking that individual from that place of subjection into paranoia, extreme paranoia, and propositional tyranny, to where they now believe something that is not true based on the tyranny. And it might be somewhat true, but it will lead them into a place where they're being gaslighted, similar to the government going back in time and changing this stuff. I don't believe that. I absolutely don't believe that. I believe that some of that information, like with the tarot cards or whatever, and all, some of that other stuff with the biblical examples of foreknowledge, that, if the kingdom of darkness would have had the ability to know everything like that, they wouldn't have crucified Jesus, because they really, they basically made a huge mistake when that happened. A lot of people don't understand. Like, it's when, in that movie, The Passion, it was like Satan was in there, telling Jesus it wasn't going to be enough, and that, his death wasn't going to be enough to save people. But they didn't know that. They had no idea what he was doing. It was all secret. They thought they were just going to get rid of him. That's why, Satan took him up to the high place, told him to cast himself down, that the angels would bear him up. And he's like, I'm not going to do it. But he played a good game. And then they finally just decided, well, we'll just crucify him. We'll see what happens. Is he going to come back? Because they were waiting for a Messiah that was just going to be like a conqueror. And of course, the whole thing went back to the Tower of Babel, when everything was separated. And you can see a lot of subtle shades of truth in that, like when you get into Pentecost and you have the divided tongues of fire. That is the same word, divided, as when you get back into that time where God disinherited the nations and divided the nations up. So Jesus was kind of reversing that whole thing back, right? He was basically taking the world back. But if they would have known, if they would have had all that kind of power and been able to see everything, and maybe they do a little bit. I think God can, maybe he's just changes things every now and again. I don't know. When you get into predestination and stuff like that, the whole idea for a lot of people in their doctrine is that people are just ordained into their destiny. But I don't believe that. But I do believe that the kingdom of darkness does have a plan, and they do have a type of, destiny, which is what you get into with the secret societies. They have that destiny philosophy, and it bewitches people because it looks like it's real. The only thing is that God can save you out of that whole thing. So, in other words, if you go along with them, then, you are kind of predestined in a sense. And that's kind of like the airplane analogy. If you choose Jesus and you become a believer, then you're predestined to be conformed into his image. But if you don't, then you are predestined to wrath, because you've rejected Jesus. So, I mean, there's an element of predestination to everything. Okay, let's see here. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, we went through some of those things, the basic environmental tyranny and the the infrastructure of that landscape that the targeted individual has to masquerade through. They have plausible deniability. You have to create your own plausible deniability, because, of course, there are people who simply don't know. And the others, well, they're in on it. I know it sounds crazy, but it's happening to targets all around the world right now. Wherever you are, whenever you're going to be listening to this, if you're dealing with this, you're not crazy and you're not alone. I'd like to thank everybody for coming in here. I'd like to thank all of those who put their questions in and interact with me in the comments. I'd like to thank everybody who helped support me and the channel. The link is in the description. God bless. Be good to yourselves. Be safe.